fine Tuesday evening. We are about to explore our second round of uh, study and examination of the Holy Odu Irete Obara. So, last week was our introductory session. So, we went through the mechanics, the Odu, the orientation, the manifestation, taboos, etc. And then we went through the featured verse, featured story of Ahun, the tortoise, who we affectionately know as Ajakba. Um, he can also be called Abahun or Alabahun or Ijakba. But either way, they're always talking about the same way. He's the tortoise, and he is the real trickster. Sometimes people will make the mistake of calling Eshu a trickster, but Eshu is not a trickster. Ajakpa is a trickster in the same trickster tradition that, like, Brer Rabbit, or who is the hare down there in South Africa, Brother Nancy over in Ghana, in the Ashanti territory. Those are really tricksters. I think here in the West is Coyote, who is a trickster. But for the Yoruba, Ajapa is the trickster. A almost identical character with many of the same stories actually in the Fon territory is Yogbo. But Yogbo is not an animal. The other tricksters are animals. Yogbo the glutton is not an animal. He's a person, but he has almost all the exact same attributes as Ahun, the tortoise. Anyway, when we look at the tortoise, the trickster, we are obviously looking at something allegorical, right? Because whatever happened, the tortoise was not talking to the king, and the tortoise was not going to the palace, and the tortoise was not farming, and the tortoise wasn't doing any of those things. So these are allegories, right? And that's going to be important for us going into this wave of exploration and analysis of the featured verse, because this is a super important lesson that I want you to absorb as deeply as possible. And it happens to overlap with my interest in Yoruba sacred kingship. And so I decided that I would take this opportunity to do a couple of things at once, which is revisit the sacred text, but also take us a little bit deeper dive into understanding what sacred kingship is and what's the significance of having, the tortoise appear in this capacity, that he does in Irete Obara. And so to do that, it makes sense for us to have a real good understanding of what is a Yoruba king, right? What's a Yoruba king? If you have my book, The Fundamentals, you know that that book intends to be a kind of a blueprint of the constellation of our belief system. And there's a portion there where I talk about the kings and the palace and the kingdom and the Adugbo and then the family house, and down to the head of the family. But it's important within the context of this conversation, because when Ifa is talking about a king, it presupposes that you know what a Yoruba king is. It's presupposed that you know what any kind of king is, really. But we're from the diaspora primarily, and there ain't no kings. As a matter of fact, the whole premise of the diaspora is that there's no more kings, no more kings, no more kings. Everybody fought against the kings. Spanish, French, English, whatever. The only ones who still kick it with the king hardcore are like some of the English colonies, right? The Canadians still are closely aligned with the Queen of England. But other than that, people who are in the diaspora are like later for that. We're democracies, we're governments. We don't deal with monarchies. So chances are you have some of that programming in your system, right? A king to you is the relationship between Europe and the diaspora, right? And then you might have, let's see, some other, if you've been brought up in a Christian environment, which you probably have been, if you didn't practice Christianity or they didn't practice Christianity in your house, your neighborhood, your community, the country, on the dollar bill it says, "In God we trust," and they're not talking about nothing but the Christian God, right? So you're used to the biblical treatment of kings, and you've probably heard some stories of King David, King Solomon. There's one fantastic story of the Bible about the king who had the dream, and somebody went and interpreted the dream. I think it was Joseph who went and interpreted the dream. I remember that because it's a good story about a dream, and that was one of the first times I got really excited about dreams, because I was at this lecture and the guy broke down the dream in this really fantastic way. But anyway, your point of reference for a king is probably limited to something Jewish or something European. That's important to know. And although there are some overlaps and some similarities and some parallels, you need to know what a Yoruba king is in general in order to appreciate what it means that Ajapa, the tortoise, impersonated the king. All right, so I want to run it through one more time with a different filter, with the intent to help you get a better grip on this particular verse, and extract all the medicine and all the healing from it that you possibly can in the next couple of days before the Itadogun cycle ends. Ifa has given us a very tremendous blessing, a tremendous wisdom in this Odu. So a king, a Yoruba king, first of all, by definition, must be a descendant of Oduduwa. You have to be a descendant of Oduduwa to bear the crown, right? And that takes us back to the time of Obatala. Obatala came before Oduduwa, but Obatala didn't establish the palace culture that proliferated and organized the people who we recognize as Yoruba. That's Oduduwa. So any king in Yoruba land, to be a legitimate king, he must trace his lineage straight back to Oduduwa. Okay? That's one of the first things you got to understand about somebody being the king, right? In time immemorial, we had a relationship with Oduduwa. That's the first thing. So it's in your bloodline. A king inherits the throne and is able to sit upon the throne strictly by virtue of the fact that his blood entitles him or makes him eligible to do so. Next, when we say a king in Yoruba land, we're talking about, and I mean in the traditional sense, we're talking about somebody who the people recognize as the embodiment of Orisha. He is one who has power like that of the Orisha, or he is recognized as the second in command to the Orisha. Okay? And so when you look at the king installation festivals, what will happen in a variety of different ways is that the king will come out and the Orisha devotees, the Orisha priestesses will challenge the king somehow. This is like when they're doing the rites, the festivals. And they'll challenge the king. They might circle the king and sing certain songs. They might do certain chants and incantations where they'll be saying to the king, "You are the highest, you are the most powerful, you are the mightiest, you are the one who owns the land and all the people on it. We kneel before you in all your greatness and your majesty. We breathe and live at your behest." On and on and on and on. These are the priests and the priestesses now. And they're doing this in the name of Yemoja or in the name of Shango or in the name of Obatala. They say, but the only reason that you get to do that is because Orisha said so. So when Orisha says that you can't do this anymore, we're going to be the ones to come and bring you the insignia that says your time is up. It's the Orisha creates the first layer of democracy in the Yoruba kingdom. There's checks and balances, and that's built into the Oduduwa Obatala story. Like I was saying, Obatala comes first, Oduduwa follows up. Oduduwa lineage are the ones who can wear the crown, but the only one who can put the crown onto an Oduduwa person's head is an Obatala person. So it's the lineage of Obatala that confers the crown, but it's the lineage of Oduduwa that bears it. That trend continues in all the kingdoms, one way or another. It is an Orisha person, it is a priestess or a priest of Orisha that gives the power of the land, lends the power of the land, of the soil, to say, we will recognize and transfer our authority to you. We will defer our authority to you as the king. But you are answerable to our Orisha. That's the old school way of doing it. So the king is approved by Orisha, and Orisha is the land. Orisha is the deity that rules that land. That's why every kingdom has a different Orisha who's in charge. Shonko in Oyo, Oshun in Oshobo, Obatala in Iranje, so on and so forth. Each kingdom has their own Orisha. But the one who bears the crown is always a descendant of Oduduwa. I hope you understand what I'm saying. It's almost like federal and state. Orisha is like state. Oduduwa is like federal. Sort of. In terms of power and authority and how it's passed down from one to the next. Anyway, to be the king, you must be confirmed by Orisha. To be the king, it signifies that you own the land and everybody who lives on it. That means the farm. That means the artistry. That means the military. That means the priesthoods. That means the marketplace. All of the resources that are on that land and everything that's necessary to cultivate those resources, process those resources, distribute those resources, all of those things belong to the king. That's what it means to be the king. Tremendous authority and influence. To be the king means that you live in the palace. You live in the palace. And the palace is not just a house. The palace is like, imagine a walled city. And in this walled city, you've got forest, you got, houses. It's big. Once upon a time, all of the Yoruba kingdoms had this similar layout. Now, unfortunately, only Oshobo has the full spectrum where you can go. There's the wall, there's the grove, the old town is all intact. And this is a really significant thing for us to take into consideration, because when you go to Lagos, man, Lagos is hot. Oh my God, why is Lagos so hot? Because they cut down all the trees. But every kingdom used to be completely surrounded by trees. And this is very, important. I'm in Georgia right now. I just climbed Stone Mountain. You look out at Stone Mountain and you can see what the world was like. And it made me think about how, Canada is. I like this about Canada. When you go to Canada, there's a city, and then you leave the city, and it's all forest till you get to the next city. And then you leave that city, and it's all forest. When here in Georgia, there's still so much, this magnificent, lush green forest, but, they're hacking it down like crazy. Once upon a time, all throughout Yoruba land, it was all forested, especially around the palaces. And the king was the one who owned all of everything in that realm. Inside the palace is the royal city. Outside the palace, then you got what people will call villages or farm. Either way, in that realm, the king was the sovereign, the lord, and the master, right? So we're talking about, again, a Yoruba king. Right now, how many Yoruba people you think there are in the world? 10 million? 15 million? 30 million. There's like 40 million Yorubas. 40 million. That's a big number. That's a big number. Just to put it into context, there's about 40 million African Americans total. So that means if you were to take every single black person from the United States, you could do an almost one-to-one swap just with the Yorubas. 1-to-1. Every single African American goes over, brah, and every Yoruba comes, brah. It's like that. That's a lot of people. To put that into context, Nigeria is the most populous African country in the world. The number 2 most populous African country in the world is Brazil. And the number 3 most populous African country in the world is the United States of America. 40 million people constitutes the 3rd largest single country of black, the 3rd largest black population in the world in a single country. Why am I saying this? Because you need to understand when we talk about a Yoruba king, this 40 million people didn't just spring up out of nowhere. The Yorubas are characteristically urban, organized, centralized, highly governmentally, sophisticated. Right? So a Yoruba kingdom wasn't 10, 15 people, wasn't 100 people. We're talking about thousands of people, tens of thousands of people. Okay? So to be the king means that you traditionally are a person with a considerable scope of responsibility. It's a big job when you say this person is a king or I come from a royal family. It's a big job. Next, obviously the king is the only person who can sit on the throne. Okay? No one else can sit on the throne. Even when the king is alive, his own child. There's a verse of Ifa where the king is supposed to make sacrifice for his son not to be bigger than him. He refuses to do it. The son goes away, and the son is never trying to replace his father, but the king was paranoid because he didn't make the sacrifice. The son is coming home. Everybody tells the king, your son is coming. The king runs out the front door to see his son. His son goes in the back door, and he's going to surprise his father and sit upon his throne like he used to when he was a little boy, because the king the prince left a long time ago. When the father came back in, he saw his son as an adult sitting on the throne, and the father just wept. Or I guess you say he just wept, huh? The father just wept, the king just wept, because nobody was supposed to sit on the throne. So that meant he had to abdicate the throne. All that to say that the king is uniquely privileged to sit upon the throne. Okay? These are all attributes and characteristics of the king. I want you to take them into consideration. They matter for us understanding this verse of Yureti Obada. It's about bloodline. It's about being approved by Orisha as being the owner of the land. It's about occupying and keeping the palace. It's about being able to sit upon the throne. It's about being able to hold and manipulate certain kinds of icons. Maybe a staff, maybe a scepter, something like that. Maybe wearing certain kinds of beads. All of these are things that a king alone has access to. So when we talk about a king, we're talking about someone who is uniquely privileged, has very specialized access, has a very broad scope of influence, and an equally intricate and demanding set of responsibilities and obligations. Okay? Because the king is managing all of those things, the farm, the market, etc. Okay? The king is somebody who, last but not least, his most important icon is the crown. Nobody can wear the crown except for the king. Okay? So when we say king in Yoruba land, we're talking about all of these attributes and more. Okay? That's what Ifa presupposes you already know when a king shows up in the story. Okay? I'm giving you all this information so you understand. If I say king, it's supposed to activate that backstory for you to understand who this person is in the story. Okay? How he functions. It's not just a political thing. It's not just a social thing. It's not just a blood thing. But it's all of those things and then some. Okay? Now, in order to also appreciate how someone is regarded as a king and revered as a king, we also should look at how a person is actually installed upon the throne. Okay? And one example that I've looked at a little bit is there's two actually that I've looked at that I think if you want to follow up on it. This one, Yoruba Sacred Kingship by Pemberton. Very, very good book on Yoruba kingship if you want to know more about the subject in a little bit more detail. This is a compilation, Yoruba Sacred Kingship. And another one which is more, I think I call this more philosophical or kind of analytical. This is Black Kings and Critics by Andrew Apter. He was out at UCLA. Black Critics and Kings by Andrew Apter. It's the hermeneutics of power. He's a very smart dude, Andrew Apter. Pemberton is kind of like he just did his homework and he gives it to you like a sociologist, straight. No curved lines, no nothing. Just what happened first, second, third. Andrew Apter is brings Public Enemy into the conversation. So it's rich in that regard. Anyway, when you start looking at those two books, they give you some insights into how a person actually ascends the throne. And that process of ascending the throne is also important, number one, for our ability to understand and appreciate what Ifa is telling us in Irete Obara, but also for you to be able to actually apply this template to your actual life, to your day-to-day life, to contextualize your experience. It's going to be important that you take a look at this process of becoming a king. Okay? What does it take? How does it happen? Well, one of the things that happens is when we look at this one from Pemberton and we look at the kingdom of Ila. And so some of y'all are going to remember Ila. What is Orangun? What is Orangun? When we talk about Orangun Ila, what's that associated with? Anybody ever heard that, Orangun?
She said, Baba.
Agbato.
Is that Epo?
Yes, exactly. Orangun Ila is synonymous with the Holy Odu Ofumeji. Ekpa Odu, the big mama of them all. When she talks, the conversation ends. That is Orangun. So Orangun and Ogunda are two of the Olodu that are distinct because Orangun is synonymous with Ofumeji and it is a kingdom. Orangun is a kingdom. Okay? And the king is the Orangun of Ila. And Ogundameji is synonymous with Orisha Ogun. All the rest, right, are interpreted. Ogunda is synonymous with Ogun. When you hear it, you know, no, Ogun comes through here. And Orangun is synonymous with that. So that's just an interesting sort of a pure attribute of the Odu in question. But it gives us a sense of the antiquity of Orangun Ila as a kingdom, and therefore an understanding of the authenticity of their kingship. Because there's a lot of kings now. When we talk about original kings and people doing things the way that they did in the beginning, we can be confident that Orangun is representative of Yoruba tradition. I hope you follow me. I want to make sure you get that we're talking about a king in terms of the most authentic sourcing. One of the things that happens when you start to ascend the throne of Orangun Ila is that, number one, all of the royal princes, all the princes, there might be 10 eligible men who could ascend the throne, and they go through different phases and steps to get down to like the semifinals, right? So what I'm going to tell you about is sort of the semifinals up to the finals of becoming enthroned as the king. The candidates have to come and swear an oath. And in this oath, they promise that, like we swear and we make a pact to help bring about the good condition, they make a pact to govern with wisdom and to put everything on the line, to even give their lives for the kingdom, for the crown, for the palace, for all of the things that I mentioned before that make a king a king. So the first thing that they do is they got to make this oath, right, in order to be eligible. Or once they've been proven eligible, in order to just go to the next stage, you swear this oath. Number two, then the candidates, the prime candidate goes before Orisha, right? So before I said you have to be approved by Orisha, but on the way, you have to go to Orisha and you have to become what they call Alanwo. Alanwo. The Alanwo is synonymous with Ewo, something that is taboo, something that is forbidden. So you're going to stay Alanwo. You're going to be embodiment of taboo for 3 months, more or less, which means you don't ever get to go back to your family home. You don't ever get to go back to your family compound. You don't ever get to go back and see your parents once you become a candidate. Why? Because if I see my father, what do I have to do? I have to dobale. I got to get down. If I see my mother, what do I have to do? I have to dobale. But as the king, it's taboo for me to dobale. So I cannot disrespect my father. I cannot disrespect my mother. But I cannot disrespect the crown either. Therefore, once I have ascended the throne, I can never go back and see my father and my mother again. I am Alamwo. Likewise, I have become estranged from all of my, my cousins and aunts and uncles and all that kind of stuff. I am a taboo. I am a set aside. I am in isolation. Next, I have to go back to the palace, and I got to pledge allegiance to the royal chieftaincies. I got to pledge allegiance to the palace. I have to swear that I'm going to work, because these are going to be the chiefs. This is like the Senate. I got to swear that I'm going to work in agreement with the leadership of the kingdom. I won't be antagonistic toward them, and they won't be antagonistic towards me. We're reinforcing our obligation to work together in favor of the kingdom and the community. Next, after the 3 months are over, then I report back to the chiefs as the candidate, and I kneel down for the very last time. This is inside the palace. Now I kneel down for the very last time. After this, no one will ever ask me to kneel or to bow, ever. And as a matter of fact, it's taboo. The king is not supposed to bow. The king is not supposed to dobale or kneel for anyone, ever. And then all the candidates are there, and they're in the palace. They're outside the palace. All the community is there, and you guys remember in what's the name of the movie, Black Panther, when Killmonger is going through and he's like, "Is this your king? Is this your king?" Well, that's sort of a parody of how it goes. They will go over and put their hand over this one and say, "Is this the one, Sheuni? Sheuni?" And they will say, "No, he's not the king." And then the next one, is he your king? No, he's not our king. Is he your king? And everybody cheers. Yes, that's our king. He's the one. Then they're gonna all those guys who were all the candidates now pick up the one who was chosen to be the king. They carry him into the palace. They take off his old clothing. They adorn him with fine gowns. They put him in the royal beads. They bring him and they sit him onto the throne. They give him the irukere, the horsetail switch. They bring him whatever other symbol or insignia of his office. If it's a scepter or if it's a staff or whatever, he holds those. They put the crown upon his head. Everybody kneels before him and they say, Kabiesi Alaye Olua, Lord and Master of the world. And so, in another way, that whole process and that motif, although I went through it relatively quickly, it should ring a bell. We always tell a story like this. What does that story mirror? What I just told you about the Rangoon of Ila. What verse of Ifa that we always refer to? What does that pattern? What mirrors that same pattern? There's a story that we tell of someone becoming king. Over and over and over again. Awolowo.
Is it Aranisha?
Aranishan. Right? Aranishan, it happens for him, by happenstance. Right? He wants to kill himself. But it's his fate mandated that he couldn't do it. But he had to go through all this hardship. He struggled. He was humiliated. They beat him up. They took his jinn. And then in the end, he ended up ascending the throne. So that motif of going through hardship and struggle and being humiliated before you reach the pinnacle is a part of the process of becoming the king. So when we say a Yoruba king, we're talking about somebody who has tasted life. We're talking about somebody who has gone the heights and the lows. Somebody who has been committed. After they made their commitment and pledged allegiance, they were still made to kneel and to beg and be humiliated, and all of those things happen. So the burden of leadership, the burden of responsibility, the burden of being a steward are all part of the process of being king in Yoruba land. When you say king, you mean all of those things. It's implicit. I hope you understand what I'm saying. You can't say king without understanding all of those nuances, or having those nuances in mind at least. Now, when you take those into consideration, both the history and the origin of a king, as well as how a person becomes a king, what the process is to ascend the throne, and then you look at the king as a psychological archetype, that's where I want you to start grasping the real lessons that this Odu has for you. Okay? Because what is it that the king relies upon that allows him to stand tall and govern in the wake of humiliation? What is it that would allow you? Think about your most humiliating moment. Were you ready to go the next day and sit on the throne and have everybody look at you and you call the shots for everybody? Were you ready the next week after you were totally embarrassed? When you were isolated from your support network, from your friends, from your family, and you couldn't go back to your source to get recharged, to get direction, to get guidance. In the wake of that, were you ready to then go and stand before the masses and make all the definitive decisions that would decide the quality of everybody's life, that would decide the market, that would decide the who we go to war with, that would settle land disputes? Were you mentally and emotionally in a position to govern after you have been isolated for an extended period of time? Because that is what the king is being asked to do. To be able to do that requires a high level of confidence, sense of purpose, and a strong sense of identity. It's those attributes that allow the king to emerge from hardship and difficulty and govern. It is his sense of confidence, purpose, and identity that makes the king able to centralize everything in his environment and enjoy a sense of supreme balance, calm, and stability. Everyone else is losing their marbles. They're ready to just end it. But the king is grounded, centered, focused. Okay? As an archetype, the king indicates the need for you to find that space within your own consciousness. You need to find your own groundedness. You need to be absolutely certain about something. And your sense of identity needs to be one of those things that you're absolutely certain about. So, what's the source of the king's identity? What's the source of the king's purpose? Well, the source of the king's identity and purpose is his bloodline. For you, it's your ancestral promise. That's the source. See, if you just rely upon yourself, when you go through hardship, when you go through humiliation, you're going to have a tendency to over-identify with the shame, with the embarrassment, with the mistake, because you are brand new. As old as you think you are, as much experienced as you think you are, when it comes to your lineage, you just are still a little boy. You're still a little girl. Right? You think about children, they've only done something 5 times. They've only done something 15 times. They've only had these experiences. You know, a child who's 8 years old who had to do something for a year, for 2 years, my God, that's a quarter of his life. But for you, 2 years, like, bro, you're going to be all right. 2 years really isn't that long. Just take a breath. You take it one day at a time. I promise you'll be all right. But if you're 8, that's a long time. And it is a long time. It legit is. It's like a quarter of my life. Right? But your life in the relationship to your lineage, you're like that 8-year-old when you look at the lineage. So being able to just understand that you have an ancestral promise, it takes the burden off your shoulders exclusively. The hardship, the embarrassment, the shame, the ridicule, whatever it is that you're living in the process of becoming whole, this is your first time doing it, but it's not the first time that anyone has done it. Your lineage has experienced this many, 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 many times in the process of delivering on one single goal, which is your ancestral promise, and you're part of it. So if you can keep that in mind, you're not going to overstate and over-evaluate the hardship or the difficulty of your particular experience right now. This is a tiny part of a long chain. This will give you strength. This will give you confidence. This will deepen your sense of identity. Being able to identify with your ancestral promise. Number 2, the other thing that is on your side that works to your favor is embodying your ori. You may not know exactly what your natural gifts and talents are. You may not be able to define exactly what the visionary goal for your life is. And to say that by the time I'm dead and gone, I will have done A, B, and C. You may not know that, but you need to know that you do have a destiny. You're not a free-floating radical. You're not a random something that just happened to be here. You have a destiny. Something brought you to the world, something very specific and precise. And that's something that brought you to the world also brought natural gifts and talents with it. So whatever it is that you need to be in the world and whatever contribution you need to make, you also brought the ability and the skill and the inclination to execute that thing with expert precision. This is an understanding that you need to have in order to be confident as you take the journey to ascend the throne of your destiny. As the king draws from his identity, so must you. As the king draws from his ancestral promise, so must you. Because the king is going to ascend the throne of the kingdom and govern all the people. You are going to ascend the throne of your destiny and govern yourself. But the process is very much the same. Last but not least, you have as a source of confidence and strengthening and deepening of your identity and understanding that you are Enya. And as Enya, Olodumare created you to help bring about the good condition. You were explicitly made to bring heaven to earth and earth to heaven and make the two so identical that they're indistinguishable from one or the other, so that you might remain in the heavenly realm with Olodumare. That's the threefold sourcing of your identity, your purpose, and your strength, your confidence. Your personal destiny, your ancestral promise, and bringing about the good condition. These are all things that are natural to you. These are all things that create, a framework and a set of parameters for you to run this race and take this journey with total confidence. Okay? Even in the face of difficulty, even in the face of great adversity, you've got those three pillars to give you guidance and direction. The next aspect of understanding what the king represents to us psychologically is exploring what it means for the king to own the land and all the people on it. This is representative of our capacity and the necessity for us to take ownership and manage all of the resources associated with living. We need to nourish ourselves. We need to protect ourselves. We need to cultivate our spiritual well-being. We need to be managing our wealth. We need to be engaging in a healthy network. All of these are, right, if you look at the king owns the farm. What's the farm? That's food. The king owns the military. What's the military? That's your protection. Right? On and on and on. You can look at the marketplace. That's your money. Everything that a society, a kingdom, a civilization is a macrocosm of the individual. And so as the king governs the macro, you govern the micro. The elements are the same though. It's just the scope of your responsibility is smaller. And this is a perfect metaphor for how we understand Ori as a small portion of Olodumare. Your Ori is your portion of Olodumare. And as Olodumare functions in the cosmos, so does Ori function in your being, in your existence. When I would teach it to the young children, I would tell them about the ocean. I say, hey, if we go to the ocean and we take a bowl and we stand in the middle of the ocean, or we stand waist deep in the ocean, and then we take the bowl and we dip the bowl into the ocean, what do we have in the bowl? We have ocean water. The water in the bowl is no different from the water that we're standing in. It's just the water in the bowl is a smaller portion. Your Ori is represented by the bowl of water. It's the same as the vast ocean, just a smaller portion. Okay, and so it's a equally applicable, I guess, template or motif that we could say for the individual and their household and their family, and the palace and the broader family of the community. But the king manages all of that which he owns. All the territory and everything that makes the territory function is what is under the king's jurisdiction. With all of that, the king is charged with creating an environment. And this environment that the king creates has to be healthy. It's an environment that has to thrive. It's an environment that has to be, growing and flourishing. And what does the king do to ensure that? The king provides structure. The king provides order. The king provides systems. These are the keys to the king's ability to govern. There's structure in terms of these are the chiefs. This chief is senior to that chief. That chief is senior to the next chief. These are things that set your priorities. They're not chiefs in your mind, they're priorities. This is my first priority. This is my second priority. This is my third priority. I have to handle, my health first, and I have to handle my money second. I have to handle my housing third, right? You have to create priorities for your kingdom, which is yourself. And then you create systems. And your systems keep you in perpetual motion at regular intervals so that you're able to take care of all of the areas of your well-being. All of this is the essence of being a king. Then when you get to the throne is your command center. The throne is your headquarters. Right? That's where you sit to call the shots. You got to create a place where your power is centralized, where you're able to work your magic and do what it is you do and command with total authority. Where you govern your own life with total authority. And so all of these elements that we look at that are emblematic of the king translate to things that you engage in as mental activities, as emotional activities, as interpersonal habits in order to enable you to govern your life and be supreme. Okay? So let me pause there because there's two more segments, but before we go, I want to make sure we're aligned on the same page. Based upon this conversation so far, looking at what is a king, what is the origin of a king, how one becomes a king, and then what that process means to you personally as a human being on a journey. Do you have any questions? Question one, going once. All right, I'm going to dive in. Okay, we got two. Muy nama. Boy, I told.
So my question, Baba, is to this day, how is it confirmed? Is the lineage of Oduduwa? Does that come from a Ifa, a divination, several Ifa divinations to ensure the integrity of the reading?
No, the kingship lines are managed by Oriki. They all know who's the father of who and who's the father of who and who's the father of who. So the only you would know by your lineage if you're eligible for kingship. Is that what you mean? Who is actually a son of Oduduwa?
What about these Obas that you have in the United States?
Oh, okay. So when I'm talking about the Obas, I'm talking about the original kings. In Yoruba land, the original, there's two theories. The most authentic and traditional theory is of the 16 kings. Oduduwa has 16 sons. If memory serves me correctly, I think two of them were daughters, though. One was a daughter. I think that Oduduwa's daughter went to Ijebu. No, Obanta went to Ijebu. No, there's a wife. There's a daughter. There's two, and one of them was a twin. There were two. There was somebody who had twin brother and sister, and they ran off because in that time they were executing twins, and that daughter became the mother of a lineage, and then there's another one that was a daughter. But anyway, Oduduwa is said to have had 16 sons, 16 children. Those are the original Yoruba kings. Another theory that comes from Samuel Johnson is that there were 7. But either way, anything after those original 16, that's why our Ijuba is so important. Because those are original kings. Those are original kingdoms. Right? And then everything after that becomes like, that's what we would call proliferation. Not that they're not legitimate kings, but they're not original kings.
All right, one last thing.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there was some rivalry amongst the elephant, who's now deceased, and the Oni of Ifa. Now, is that a traditional struggle, or is that just something unique between their relationship?
The Alafin and the Oni of Ife.
Yes.
The Alafin and the Oni of Ife, yes, there has been long-standing power tension between the two because Ife is the cultural and historical cradle of Yoruba people, and Oyo is the political, economic, military hub of the Yoruba people. And so, which king is senior? The Oni is senior because he's first. There's no king like the Oni. But the Alafin is senior because he's got bigger army and more influence. When you say Yoruba, actually you're talking about Oyo people who are under the Alafin. Everybody originally, some people still now, if you talk to them, they won't say I'm a Yoruba. They'll say I am, Ekiti. The Yorubas are the Oyo. So there's always tension. As a part of Yoruba identity is tension about what's our relationship. And so if you like that kind of stuff, if you're into politics, you'll get a thrill out of Yoruba identity politics because they just go on and on and on. It's endless. And then if you really want to add something to it, you start talking about the relationship between the Yorubas and the Edos, and then it just goes off the rails. And then you talk about the Yorubas and the Ewe and the Yorubas and the Fon. It's a whole other thing. But that's just the nature of the game, is that you're always going to find tension between the different groups about how our relationships are formed. It's part of how the story is told. It means you have to get several people in the room and they all have to talk for a long time and compare stories, and then everybody goes away with their own impressions of what's real and what's not. So yeah, that's an important question that will never ever ever go away and never be irrelevant, because that's just the nature of the people and the culture. Okay, Christelle, good evening.
What is the responsibility of the offspring to the king? Do they have, if my father has gone through the rites of chiefdom, do the offspring have responsibility in the physical and in the spiritual?
Okay, it started to get a little choppy, but I think you were asking about.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I think you asked about the responsibility of the offspring to the father that becomes enthroned. Is that right?
In the physical world and then spiritually, yes.
Um, well, the responsibility to the children to the parents is binding. That doesn't change. Um, so whereas the responsibility of the king to his parents does change, but the responsibility of the father to the children pretty much remains intact. So the children are going to come to the palace, you know, with the father if he's unmarried. I mean, if he's married and has children, right?
Yeah, sorry I have bad service. The offspring have responsibility.
That cut out all together. I didn't hear any of that.
I'll try one more time. Do the offspring have responsibility to the kingdom like the king does as well?
No, not by definition. Not by definition. No, they're not formally installed to do one thing or another. Yeah, only the king is installed.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. That technology is wild. So when we look at the way in which the king is installed, and we look at the origin and how the king's installation reinforces the ancient history and those things, it gives us this opportunity to understand the kingship as a process by which we organize our lives to have maximum authority over our destiny. And so when we look at the process of ascending the throne of destiny, then we start with the beginning of our lives. We don't have to go back into ancient history. We, again, conceptually, we can, if we accept the tradition and what the tradition teaches, then we accept that we each have a prenatal choice. Each of us has a kunleya. Each of us chose to bring something into the world. And so what we do is every day we swear an oath to our akunleya. In the same way that the king, the prince, swears an oath to govern with wisdom and total dedication, well, you swear an oath to your akunleya. You reinforce the oath, and you swear every day with your life, I will do anything that's required to fulfill my destiny. I will draw no lines. There's no limitations for what I will do for my kingdom. The people are depending on me. I will be humiliated. I will be supremely patient. I will fight to the death. I will do anything and totally compromise whatever makes me comfortable in favor of upholding the dignity and the sanctity of the crown. This is not about me and my personality. This is about my obligation to the crown. This is about my obligation to my prenatal choice. I'm already here because of what was chosen, what I chose. So every day I swear an oath with my prenatal choice. And I swear I will do anything. I will not draw any limitations for what I am willing to do and become in order to fulfill my prenatal choice. That's number one. Number two, in the same way that the king never goes back home, right? The king never goes and sees his father again. He never goes and sees his mother again. What does that represent? That represents the king going backwards. That means that represents the king going into his comfort zone. I will not revert back to my comfort zone, and I will not quit. Once I have advanced, I will not do anything that will take me back. I will not be living in the past. I will not go to the safety and the security of my mother's lap. I will not go to the safety and the security of my father's advice and his embrace. Right? I'm going forward in the fulfillment of my destiny. I don't mean your mother and your father literally. I mean what they represent. That which is totally comfortable and familiar and safe. I will not go back to what is safe and comfortable. Right? Are you feeling what I'm saying right now? This is how you ascend the throne of destiny. You look at the pattern of becoming a king and you apply it to your life. As the king swears an oath to govern with wisdom and to give his life as necessary, you make a pledge to your akunleyan. You make an oath to be totally devoted to your destiny. You make a policy that just like the king never goes home, you never revert back to what was familiar. You never revert back to what's easy. You never revert back to what's comfortable and familiar. You don't give yourself cop-outs. You keep pushing. You keep leading forward. Just as the king goes and pledges allegiance to the chiefs and to the crown and to the process of royalty, you make a pledge to the people and the cause that you're destined to serve. And whatever it is that's part and parcel of what you serve, that's where you make your network. That's where you make your alliances. That's where you say, I am going to negotiate with the process. I'm going to operate within this process, and I'm going to negotiate with the reality of this process. This is my discipline. I'm a babalawo. This is how Ifa teaches. This is how I'm going to live my life. If it's cramping my style, if it's limiting my scope, if I need to negotiate with this practice, though. I can't just go off and start to see I'm going to be an acupuncturist, or I'm going to be talking to the acupuncturist about to get my point of reference. This is why I tell people, look, you can't be going to the science book to explain Ifa things. You can't be talking about the Bible to explain Ifa things. You can't be talking about, I'm reading the freaking hieroglyphs to explain to me what Orisha is. That doesn't apply. It applies for them, for that thing. But you can't take the laws from this discipline and apply them in this field. I am a babalawo. I am going to trust the process of Ifa. Or I'm a psychologist. I'm going to trust the methodology of psychology. Or I'm a Republican. I'm going to trust the process of being a Republican. Or I'm a Democrat. Whatever it is that you are, and in the same way that the king pledges an oath to the royal family to negotiate with all of the chiefs in the royal structure, you pledge to adhere to the rules and the structures of whatever your discipline is. This is how you ascend the throne of destiny. Now, you can deviate from any one of these 3 points, and you can make it up as you go along if you want to. And you can maybe estimate in a kind of a sort of way you could reach your destiny. Or you could reach something that looks like your destiny, whatever. If that's how you want to work it out, fine. But I'm telling you that people have been living a long time. And that's why we have tradition. Because this hasn't been tried once or twice or 10 or 15 times. This is millions and millions and millions of people living meaningful lives according to these motifs and patterns, organizing their societies and their civilizations according to these patterns of life. That's why we have tradition. And the tradition provides an excellent template for you to understand what it means to ascend the throne of destiny. Do y'all realize what it means that the Yorubas are kings and queens? It's not just a saying. What's up, king? What's up, queen? It's not just a saying. It's a real thing. This guy's name is Adepoju. No, that guy's name is Adepoju because his father was a king. His grandfather was a king. Her name is Adesua because she comes from a royal family. Like, for real. For real, for real. Just that in and of itself should make your brain be on fire with understanding that this is not something that is relegated to the ancient past. That's why I made the first reference in the beginning to your reference to kingship is probably something out of the Bible or something you're talking about, colonial Europe. Both of which are very far away from our reality. Right? Culturally and historically. But in this structure of traditional civilization, you have all of the blueprints for understanding the collective consciousness that informs your personal consciousness. Because like I said, you didn't just come out of nowhere. You didn't just pop up out of somewhere. You are the extension of antiquity. You are history in the making. So the way this is set up programs the way you think. I'm saying a lot of things at one time because I just don't have enough time to break it all down. But hopefully when you get back to the playback, you'll have some notes that you'll be able to say, hey, what did he mean by that? What was that all about? We got a few more points here that I want to drive home about ascending the throne of destiny, because that's the really most important part of the conversation that I want you to really, really, really absorb. You, as the king or the prince elect, goes to the palace. He knows he's on the verge of becoming the king, but he deliberately and knowingly goes before the chiefs to be subjugated one more time. He's going to go before the chiefs and kneel before them. And when he kneels before them, they don't say, good job, son, rise up. They insult him. He said, peanut head, moron, idiot. What a doofus. And the dude is like, yo, I've been at it for 3 months. I ain't been home. I ain't had none of my mama's food. I don't get to see my friends. I'm coming to play the game. I'm kneeling before y'all. I'm trying to be humble. And you talking, right? Yeah, we talking to you, idiot. So he has to go and subject himself to that one more time. As the prince who knows he's on the verge of becoming the most powerful man in the realm, deliberately goes to be humiliated by the chiefs, so must you condition yourself to deliberately be humbled. Put yourself into the position. This is something my mother taught me a long time ago. She said, always be in the position where you're teaching somebody, but always be in the position where you're learning from somebody. So you always need to be a student and you always need to be a teacher. You need to lead people. You put yourself in a position where you're telling somebody what to do. But you also put yourself in a position where you let somebody tell you what to do. Put yourself in the position. That's why I love to go to Nigeria. One of the reasons I love to go to Nigeria. Because I get to let the young boys tell me what to do. I don't like it. It don't look right. It don't feel right. But it's good. Because that's why I can tell you with total confidence, hey, if on a good day, I got Justin Bieber status in this thing. If anybody tells you that I'm rocking like Barry White, you say, hey, don't you say that. I don't have Al Green status in this Ifa world. You can't put me in the Marvin Gaye crew in the Ifa world. Are you kidding me? Absolutely not. On a good day, I can rock with Justin Bieber status as a Babalawo. That's the honest to God truth. And if we do really well, some of y'all will come out and be like, you can get Justin Timberlake status. I'll be able to say, yeah, I got some students who reach Justin Timberlake status. Now what? And then we got a couple who's at Robin Thicke status. I got one cat who's like Robin Thicke on the mic. You should see this boy dance. Woo. You got to stay humble, ladies and gentlemen. That's what I'm saying. Stay humble. Don't get so far off into your imagination that you're thinking that you're the best thing since fried chicken. Stay humble. You don't know nothing. You can't do nothing. You're not nobody. Sit down in that corner and shut your mouth until somebody tells you to do otherwise. And when they tell you, be happy. That's Ifa. You can't grasp that, you're going to have a hard time in this world. Be humble. And the way you do that is to put yourself in situations where you are ritually humbled, where it's evident that you don't know what you're doing. Put yourself in those situations, in those circumstances, just as the king-elect puts himself before those chiefs one more time to kneel before them and have them insult him and clown him and ridicule him. Just as the king-elect knows that he's favored, he knows what he's done, he knows all the politicking he's done, but he's still got to stand out there with all the other chiefs and have them say, is this your king? Is this your king? And then they skip right over him. Is this your king? Is this your king? And they skip over him again. Is this your king? Put yourself in a situation to be chosen. Know that you need to be chosen. Don't take your position for granted. Make yourself accessible. Recognize the need to be chosen. Recognize the need for particular people to choose you. Know who it is that you need to choose you. And embrace that, because if they don't choose you, you ain't the one. You can't be the king because you said you're the king. They have to choose you as the king. So just as that king-elect subjects himself to the possibility of not being chosen, so must you put yourself into situations where you constantly reaffirm your position by creating opportunities to be chosen. Relive the butterflies and the anxiety of not knowing, are they going to choose me? Re-experience the joy and the fulfillment and the gratification that comes with your people who you want to choose you, to say, that's our person right there, that's our guy right there, that's our girl right there. Put yourself in that situation regularly to be chosen. Just as the king is then accepted and then occupies the throne and carries the scepter and wears the beads and bears the crown, so must you take your position. It's not just about humble pie, humble pie. All that false humility and all that is not where it's at either. I will tell you that I'm the Justin Bieber of this whole thing because it's the truth. But I ain't gonna lie to you and tell you that I don't have juice or I don't know what I'm doing. That I'm not gonna tell you. I know what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. And I'm the best at doing what I do. And I don't make any bones about that. I'm very comfortable with holding mine. I'm happy with having my paperwork behind me. Right? I'm happy with putting, that's why I signed my name Obafemi Origunwa, M.A. I want you to know that I know, right? I know. You need to be able to occupy your space with authority. You need to become an authority in whatever it is that you do. The objective is not to be, a novice forever. You need to be wherever there's some sector of life and activity where you you are the authority, and you demonstrate your authority. You don't have to go bumping people around, but you sit in your authority. When you're in regal estate, everybody knows. Oh yeah, now she's on the throne. Oh yeah, he's on the throne right now. That's that guy's place, right? And finally, as the prince-elect goes from becoming the Alangwo to being proclaimed as the Orangun of Ila, then you actually execute your duties. And you manage all of your affairs. And you make all of your decisions in favor of what is healthy and good for you and your community. And if it turns out well, then you take credit. If it turns out poorly, then you take responsibility. You hold yourself accountable. But you own the fact that anything that happened, if you did it properly or improperly, you did it as a king. You did it as a lord. You did it as a master. Right? It was deliberately and purposefully carried out by you. Right? It wasn't an accident. You weren't a victim. No. I led us into battle and we got squashed. Or I led us into battle and we conquered the enemy. Own it one way or the other. That is ultimately what it means to be a sovereign lord and master. And these are the ways in which Ifa and the tradition overall give us a pattern and a motif for living our best life, which I will call ascending the throne of your destiny. Now, all of that is the backdrop. You know what a king is now, right? Or you got a better idea of what a king is. So now we come back to the beginning of the story, which is Ahum impersonates the king. Ahum impersonates the king. Now, this is a very powerful story because Ahum, as I mentioned before, this is an allegory. This is a tortoise. We know that there was no tortoise in the palace who was representing the king. This is an allegory. Maybe this is a person and they just changed the name to save the innocent or whatever. But this is a story to make you think, number one. Number two, when you see the tortoise, you are talking about trickery. You're talking about, in psychological terms, the ego. The ego whose only concern is perpetuating itself. It just projects itself. And it will continue to morph and change and adapt and flip and do anything to project an image. That's the job of the ego. It's not a bad thing. But it's something that has to be relegated and understood. The ego is what is responsible for creating an image of who you are. For you and for the world. If you don't have that, you're not alive. You can't function if you don't have an ego. You don't have a good, strong, healthy, robust ego. You definitely cannot lead. So you got to be, if people who are familiar with branding, like real branding, not branding like, oh, the colors are red. That's not branding. Branding is the identity of whatever it is that you have, that identity that lives in the mind and the heart of the people. That's the brand. If I say Coca-Cola, you think this. If I say FedEx, you think that. If I say Epcot Center, then it conjures this and that. And what lives in your head is the brand. The ego is what's projecting the symbolism and the experiences for other people to pick up. The ego projects, the ego creates the brand in itself, your own brand of who you are, and manages to project it out to the world in a way that the people know you. I know Awolowo. I know Christelle. I know Essay. Yes. I know the one that they sent to me, the image that they sent to me. I know what they have projected out to me. That's your brand. Okay? So Ajapa is representative of the ego gonna just run amok. When the ego is unchecked, that's what you get with Ajapa. The brand is, ain't nobody managing the brand. It's just doing its own thing, creating its own reality. Okay. The other thing is that I want you to understand about the king, something that I didn't mention, is that the king doesn't leave the royal city. The kings that were mentioned in Oduifa, this is in the time when the kings didn't leave the royal city. So the king going to another kingdom will be a strict impossibility. So what happened in Iretiobara where Ajapa impersonates the king represents something that couldn't happen, because it's also taboo for two kings to see one another. Originally, the kings never saw one another. Number one. Number two, the kings never left the royal palace. Yoruba kingship is like a chessboard. The queen moves freely. The queen owns the market outside the palace, and she controls everything that comes in and out. But the king himself doesn't move. Right? So the fact that the tortoise is the ego, the king doesn't leave the palace, but in Iretiobara, the tortoise is assigned by the king to represent him somewhere else. What does that mean? What is the significance of the king as the highest, most sovereign, autonomous aspect of the mind, that aspect of the mind that is seated, enthroned, and governs and controls everything, that centers everything, that grounds everything? That's the king as an aspect of the mind. But that aspect of the mind has chosen the ego, the most self-serving, the most ungovernable, right, aspect of the mind, to be its representative in the face of another king. And in that process, what the king projected out didn't represent the king. It went further and impersonated the king. What does it mean when the ego is not representing you, but the ego is impersonating you? What does that mean? The king is the highest mind. The king is that which centers all the other mental, emotional, intellectual faculties. When the king is on the throne, everything is as it should be. And the king sits upon the throne to govern and dictate and mandate and manage and balance. That's the king. The king chose the trickster to be his representative. The king chose the ego to represent him. And he sent that representative to another king. And on the way, the one who he chose to be his representative didn't represent him. He went a step further. He impersonated him. What is Ifa telling us? What is Ifa telling us? You see, because what we do when we hear the verses, we think this verse is about so-and-so. And this person in the verse is so-and-so. And that person in the verse is so-and-so. This verse is about you. This verse is about you. It's not about somebody else. Everything that's happening in this verse is about you. So the question is, as you are seated upon your throne, after you have gone through all the steps and the difficulties and the trials and the tribulations to occupy the throne of destiny that is yours to govern, you choose to project yourself into the world. But as you project yourself into the world, then you start to believe your own story. And that's where you run into trouble. You believe your own story. You believe what you are projecting out into the world. You believe that the you that you send out is the real you, and the one that you send out can do anything. The one that you send out can morph and change itself into anything you want it to. Anything that suits the situation at hand. That is where you run into trouble. This is what Irete Obara is telling us in this Itadogun cycle. We have believed our own hype. We have internalized our own story and made it true. Like the little kids who cover their head and they go in and get under the blanket and they think that because I can't see outside the blanket, can't nobody see me? That's what Ifa is telling us. This is not about somebody else. This is something for each of us to examine within ourselves. How are we governing our projected identity? Are we aware? Are we cognizant of the ways in which we believe our own hype? The ways in which we've gotten full of ourselves? This is what Ifa wants us to explore. And so I want to pause here and open up a little bit more for questions, but that is the peeled back version of Irete Obara, and I look forward to hearing more from you right now about what is this verse telling us, and what do we need to know next.